The last thing my husband said to me before he drove away was, "Figure it out yourself."
I remember every word. Not because I wanted to. Because some sentences change your life forever. They divide everything that came before them from everything that comes after. That sentence was the dividing line in my life. Before that night, I was still foolish enough to believe that my husband, Daniel, loved me. After that night, I learned that sometimes the person standing beside you is the person you need to survive. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 37 years old when my husband abandoned me at Chicago O'Hare International Airport during one of the worst blizzards Illinois had seen in years. He didn't simply leave me there. He watched me struggle with my suitcase. He watched me slip on the ice. He heard me begging him to wait. And then he got into his black SUV, turned on the windshield wipers, and drove away. I stood there in the snow, watching his taillights disappear. I thought my heart was breaking. I had no idea that night was actually the beginning of my freedom. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years. From the outside, our marriage looked perfect. That was the strange thing. People admired us. They admired our house. They admired Daniel's success. They admired the vacations we posted on social media. They admired the way he held my waist at parties and kissed my forehead when people were watching. Nobody saw what happened when the doors closed. Nobody saw how he slowly turned me into someone who apologized for breathing too loudly. Daniel was charming. That was his greatest weapon. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave 10 minutes later with everyone believing he was the kindest man they'd ever met. He remembered birthdays. He sent flowers. He donated to charities. He shook hands with elderly neighbors. He helped people carry groceries. And he always made sure someone had a camera nearby when he did it. At home, he was different. He criticized my clothes, my cooking, my friends, my family, my work. Eventually, he criticized my memory.
"You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. That never happened. You always misunderstand me." Those sentences became so common that I eventually stopped trusting myself.
I had been a financial analyst before we married. I loved my career. Daniel convinced me to leave it after our first daughter was born.
"You don't need to work," he said. "I want you to have everything."
At the time, I thought that was love. Years later, I understood it differently. He didn't want me to have everything. He wanted me to have nothing that belonged only to me. No independent income. No independent bank account. No professional network. No confidence. And eventually, no questions. Our daughter, Emily, was 9 when everything began to fall apart. She was smart, quiet, and observant. Too observant. Children notice things adults try to hide.
Emily once asked me, "Mom, why does Dad talk differently to you when other people are around?"
I laughed. I told her he was tired. She didn't believe me. Neither did I. But I kept pretending. Until the night at O'Hare. The trip was supposed to be simple. Daniel had a business conference in New York. He asked me to come. I remember being surprised.
"You actually want me there?"
He smiled. "Of course. You're my wife." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, something inside me tightened. Still, I packed. We flew to New York. The conference lasted 3 days. On the third evening, Daniel received a phone call. His expression changed.
"What happened?" I asked.
"Nothing." He turned away. Then he looked at me.
"We're leaving tonight."
"Why?"
"Storm coming."
I looked at the weather forecast. A massive winter storm was moving through the Midwest. Flights were already being delayed.
"Shouldn't we wait until morning?"
"No." His voice was cold.
"We're leaving."
So we left. The flight to Chicago was one of the roughest flights I had ever experienced. When we landed at O'Hare, the airport was chaos. Flights were canceled. People were sleeping on luggage. Families were crying. The wind outside was howling so loudly that the glass walls trembled. Daniel checked his phone.
"We need to go."
I pulled my suitcase behind him.
"Where's the car?"
"In the garage." We walked outside. Snow hit my face like tiny pieces of glass. The parking lot was covered in white. Daniel unlocked the SUV. I opened the passenger door. He stopped me.
"Wait."
"What?"
"I'm going to move the car closer."
He got inside. I stood beside the vehicle. Seconds passed. Then the SUV started moving. I smiled, thinking he was pulling forward. Instead, he drove away. I stared. "Daniel." I ran after him. "Daniel." He didn't stop. I slipped. My suitcase fell over. The SUV disappeared into the snow. I stood there, soaked and shaking. I called him. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. I sent messages. Where are you? Come back. Please. Then one final message. Daniel, I'm your wife. Don't leave me here. He never answered. I spent the first hour believing he would return. The second hour believing something had happened to him. The third hour wondering whether I had finally lost my mind. At midnight, I went back inside the terminal. My phone had 6% battery. I tried calling Daniel again. Nothing. I called his office. No answer. I called his assistant. No answer. I called his brother, Mark. He answered. Claire.
Mark, Daniel left me at the airport.
Silence.
What do you mean? He drove away.
Another silence.
Are you sure?
I almost laughed. Yes, Mark.
I am standing in a hare during a blizzard. I am very sure. Where is he? I don't know.
Mark told me he'd call Daniel. He never called me back.
At 2:17 a.m., my phone died.
I had no money in my wallet. My bank card was missing.
My driver's license was in my suitcase.
And my suitcase was beside me. But I didn't know then that Daniel had planned every part of it. I thought I was simply unlucky. I was wrong.
At 4:30 a.m., an airport employee named Rosa found me sitting against a wall. You okay?
I shook my head. She sat beside me.
Family. My husband. Where is he? He left.
She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I will never forget.
Sometimes being left is the first step toward being found.
I didn't understand. Not then. She helped me find an airport charging station. I borrowed a phone. I called my sister, Megan. She answered immediately. Claire. I started crying.
Megan, I need you.
She didn't ask questions.
Where are you? 0'Hare. I'll come.
You can't.
The roads. I don't care.
She drove for nearly 4 hours.
When she finally reached the airport, I saw her walking through the terminal with her coat covered in snow.
I ran into her arms.
And for the first time that night, I felt safe.
But safety didn't last long. Because when Megan helped me check my bank account, we discovered something terrifying.
Every joint account I had shared with Daniel had been emptied.
All of them. Savings. Emergency funds. Investment account. Everything. Megan looked at me. Claire.
I stared at the screen. Maybe it's a mistake.
She shook her head.
It isn't. Then she asked the question I had been too afraid to ask. When was the last time you checked your accounts?
I couldn't remember. That was when the truth began. We drove to Megan's house. I slept for 14 hours.
When I woke up, there were 23 missed calls.
None from Daniel. All from unknown numbers. I called one. A lawyer answered.
Mrs. Bennett. Yes. My name is Jonathan Reed. Why are you calling me? I represent your husband.
My stomach dropped.
Why? There was a pause. Mr. Bennett has filed for divorce.
I sat on the edge of the bed. He did what?
He is requesting full control of the marital assets.
I couldn't speak. Then Jonathan said something even worse.
He also claims you abandoned the marital home.
I laughed. It came out as a broken sound.
He left me at 0'Hare. I understand.
No.
You don't.
I stood up. He left me in a blizzard. He took my money. He filed for divorce.
And now he's telling people I abandoned him.
Jonathan's voice softened.
Mrs. Bennett, I strongly recommend you obtain independent legal representation immediately.
I did. And that was the first mistake Daniel made. He thought I was still the frightened woman he had left at the airport.
He didn't know that the woman who walked out of that terminal was already becoming someone else. My attorney's name was Rebecca Stone.
She was terrifying.
I loved her immediately. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she opened a folder. Claire, I need you to understand something. What? This isn't just a divorce. What is it? A financial strategy. She explained that Daniel had been moving money for months.
Small amounts at first. Then larger transfers. Some accounts had been moved into shell companies.
Some assets had been transferred to an investment firm connected to a woman named Vanessa Cole.
I knew the name. Vanessa was Daniel's executive assistant. I stared at Rebecca.
Are you telling me my husband is having an affair? I'm telling you there are financial connections that need investigation.
I felt sick. Then Rebecca slid another document across the desk. It was a hotel invoice. Daniel had paid for a suite. Not for the conference. For Vanessa. The date was 6 months earlier. The second invoice was from another city. Then another. Then another. There were dozens. For years, I had blamed myself for Daniel's cruelty. I had wondered what I had done wrong. Now I knew. Nothing.
The problem had never been me. The problem was that he had already replaced me in his mind while keeping me around because I was useful.
Rebecca asked me a question. Who handles your house?
Our housekeeper.
Name? Maria.
How long has she worked for you? Almost 8 years. Trust her? Yes. Good. Don't contact her yet.
Why? Rebecca looked directly at me.
Because your husband may be monitoring the house.
That sentence changed everything. I began to realize that Daniel hadn't simply abandoned me. He had been preparing for my disappearance.
And suddenly, I remembered something. 2 weeks before the airport incident, Daniel had asked Maria to change the locks.
He told her it was for security.
She had mentioned it casually while cleaning the kitchen. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it.
Now it terrified me. 10 days after Daniel left me at 0'Hare, he finally came home.
At least, he came home to the house.
He expected me to be there. He expected me to be begging. He expected tears. Instead, he found silence. Maria was cleaning the living room. Daniel walked through the front door. He dropped his keys on the table.
Maria. Yes, sir.
Where's Claire? Maria continued dusting. I don't know. Daniel frowned.
What do you mean? She hasn't come home.
He laughed.
You're joking.
No. He looked around.
Where has my wife been?
Maria stopped.
Then she looked him directly in the eyes. Your wife? Yes. Which one?
Daniel's face went pale.
What?
Maria put down the cloth.
The wife you abandoned at 0'Hare.
He stepped backward. You knew?
I knew everything.
His knees seemed to weaken. He grabbed the back of a chair.
What did you say?
Maria's voice remained calm.
I said I knew everything.
Daniel stared at her. Where is Claire? Maria smiled sadly.
She is safe.
Where? I can't tell you.
Maria, I'm her husband.
No. She shook her head.
You were her husband.
Daniel collapsed into the chair.
And then Maria delivered the sentence that destroyed him. She knows about Vanessa.
Daniel covered his face. But Maria wasn't finished.
She knows about the money.
He looked up. She knows about the accounts. Silence. And she knows what you plan to do to her. Daniel's face turned white. Because he finally understood. I wasn't missing. I was preparing. What Daniel didn't know was that I had spent those 10 days rebuilding my life. Rebecca had helped me secure emergency funds. Megan gave me a room. I opened accounts in my own name. I recovered my professional certifications. I contacted former colleagues. And then I began investigating. Not because I wanted revenge. At first, I wanted answers. But answers have a dangerous habit. They create more questions. I discovered Daniel had been planning to divorce me for nearly 2 years. He had hired private investigators. He had photographed my purchases. He had recorded conversations. He had built a false narrative that I was unstable. Then I found the most frightening document of all. A draft psychiatric evaluation. My name was on it. But I had never met the doctor. Daniel had apparently arranged for someone to write a report claiming I suffered from severe emotional instability and could not manage financial affairs. He planned to use it in court. I stared at the document. My hands shook. Rebecca looked at me. This is fraud. What do we do? We prove it. And that became my new purpose. I stopped asking how to get Daniel back. I started asking how to make sure he could never hurt me again. There was one more person who could help. Maria. I contacted her through Rebecca. She agreed to meet. When I saw her, she hugged me. I am so sorry. I cried. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. When? Many times. I remembered. She had asked strange questions. She had warned me about Daniel coming home late. She had told me once that Vanessa had been in the house. I had ignored her. Maria reached into her purse. I kept something. She handed me a small USB drive.
What is this? Security camera footage.
My heart stopped.
From the house?
She nodded.
Daniel didn't know the cameras recorded audio.
We watched. And there he was. Daniel. Talking to Vanessa in our kitchen.
We'll make her look unstable, he said.
Vanessa laughed.
And the money? By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be gone.
I covered my mouth.
Then Daniel said the words that changed my anger into something colder.
She has nowhere to go.
Vanessa asked, what about her sister? She'll take her in.
And then?
I'll tell everyone Claire abandoned the marriage.
They laughed.
I watched myself being erased from my own life.
Then I saw something else. Daniel said.
The airport will be perfect.
I froze.
What?
Rebecca paused the video.
What did he mean?
I couldn't answer. But I knew. The airport wasn't an accident. It was planned. Daniel had intended to leave me stranded. He thought the storm would make it look like a desperate decision. He thought my dead phone would prevent me from proving anything. He thought I would panic. He thought I would come crawling back.
Instead, he gave me the one thing he never intended to give me.
Time. 10 days without him. 10 days to think.
10 days to investigate. 10 days to remember who I was before he convinced me I was nothing.
We took everything to court. Rebecca presented the financial records.
The investigators presented the shell companies. Maria provided the recordings. The airport footage showed Daniel driving away while I stood outside. His own attorney tried to argue that he believed I had another ride. The judge watched the footage, then looked at him. Mr. Bennett, is this your vehicle? Yes. Is this you driving away? Yes. Why did you leave your wife?
Daniel looked at me. For the first time in 11 years, I saw fear in his eyes. He said nothing.
Rebecca stood. Your Honor, we have additional evidence.
She presented the recording. Daniel's own voice filled the courtroom.
She has nowhere to go. Nobody spoke. Then came the recording of Vanessa. What if she finds out? Daniel answered. She won't. The courtroom became silent. I looked at him. He looked at me. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. The financial investigation became bigger than our divorce. Authorities discovered Daniel had been moving money from several companies. He had been using fake consulting contracts. Vanessa wasn't just his affair partner. She was involved in the scheme. The shell companies were real enough to hide the transfers but fake enough to make the money disappear. Daniel had thought he was clever. He wasn't. He had simply never expected anyone to look closely. Especially not me. The same woman he had spent years convincing was incapable of understanding finances was the woman who eventually uncovered his entire operation. I spent months in court. It was exhausting. There were nights I cried. There were mornings I wanted to quit. But every time I felt weak, I remembered the snow. I remembered standing at 0'Hare. I remembered Daniel's taillights disappearing. And I remembered that I survived. Then came the day Daniel lost everything. The judge ruled that the marital assets would be divided based on documented ownership. The money he had attempted to hide was recovered. The house was awarded to me. The accounts were restored. And the evidence of his financial misconduct was referred for further investigation. Vanessa disappeared from his life almost immediately. Apparently, she loved the money more than she loved him. When the money was gone, so was she. Daniel's friends stopped answering his calls. His business partners turned against him. The people who once praised him began avoiding him. His carefully constructed reputation collapsed. But the strangest moment came months later. I was leaving the courthouse when Daniel approached me. He looked older, smaller, broken. Claire. I stopped. What? Can we talk? No. Please. I looked at him. He had once been the person I was most afraid of. Now he was simply a stranger who knew too much about my past. What do you want? I want you to forgive me. I almost laughed. Why? Because I ruined everything. No. I shook my head. You ruined your life. He looked confused. What? You didn't ruin mine. I stepped closer. You tried. His eyes filled with tears. I loved you. No. I said it quietly. You loved controlling me. He looked away. And I let you. I paused. But I don't anymore. Then I walked away. I didn't look back. 6 months later, I returned to 0'Hare. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to.
I stood in the same terminal where I had once cried beside my suitcase. The storm was gone. The sky was blue. People were laughing. Families were hugging. Planes were taking off. I realized something. The airport had never been the place where my husband abandoned me. It was the place where I abandoned the version of myself who thought I needed him. I bought a coffee. I sat by the window. And I watched the planes rise into the sky. My phone rang. It was Megan.
How does it feel?
I smiled.
Like I'm finally home.
1 year after the night at 0'Hare, I started a new company.
I used my financial background to help women who had been financially controlled by their spouses.
I called it Second Horizon. The first office was small. Then another opened. Then another.
Women began coming to us with stories that sounded painfully familiar.
Hidden bank accounts. Secret debts.
Manipulation. Isolation.
Threats. Fear. I told every woman the same thing.
You are not stupid. You are not crazy.
And you are not trapped. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes I cried with them.
But every time one of them walked out with her own bank account, her own documents, and a plan for her future, I felt like I was healing another piece of myself.
3 years after the divorce, I received a letter. From Daniel.
I almost threw it away.
Instead, I opened it. There were only 3 pages. He wrote that he had lost his business.
That he had lost his friends.
That Vanessa had left.
That he had spent time in therapy.
And then he wrote,
I finally understand what I did to you.
I read that sentence several times.
Then I continued.
He said he remembered the night at 0'Hare. He said he remembered watching me stand in the snow.
He said he had convinced himself I would forgive him.
He said he thought I would come home. He said he had never imagined I could live without him.
At the bottom of the letter was one final sentence. I am sorry I didn't realize your strength until I destroyed everything.
I folded the letter. I didn't answer. Not because I hated him. Because I no longer needed anything from him. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not revenge. Nothing. That was my revenge. Living.
Years later, I sometimes think about Maria. If she hadn't been brave enough to keep those recordings, perhaps the truth would never have come out. If Megan hadn't driven through that storm, perhaps I would have broken completely. If Rebecca hadn't believed me, perhaps Daniel would have succeeded. But most importantly, if Daniel hadn't driven away that night, I might never have discovered that I could walk away too.
People sometimes ask me what happened to the man who abandoned me. I tell them the truth.
He lost everything he thought made him powerful.
But I gained something far more valuable.
Myself. There is one final thing I want to tell you. If you're listening to my story because someone in your life has made you feel small, please remember this. You are not the version of yourself someone else describes. You are the person you become when you finally stop believing their lies.
Daniel spent years telling me I was weak. He was wrong. I spent years believing him. That was my mistake. But mistakes are not the end of a story. Sometimes they're the beginning.
The night he left me at 0'Hare, I thought my life was ending. I stood alone in the snow with one suitcase.
I had no money, no phone, no plan, and no idea where I would sleep. 10 days later, he stood in our house asking Maria where his wife had gone.
Her answer brought him to his knees. But here's what he never understood.
I wasn't missing. I wasn't lost. I wasn't waiting for him. I was finding myself.
And when I finally found her, the woman I had been before Daniel taught me to doubt everything. I promised her something.
I would never abandon her again. Not for a husband. Not for a marriage.
Not for anyone.
That promise changed my life.
And if you're still listening to my story, maybe it can change yours too. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that ever happens to you. Sometimes the person who walks away is doing you a favor. Sometimes the door that slams behind you is the door you were too afraid to close yourself. And sometimes revenge isn't watching the person who hurt you suffer. Sometimes revenge is waking up one morning and realizing that their name no longer has the power to hurt you. That was my revenge. I didn't destroy Daniel. I didn't need to. He destroyed himself. I simply stopped standing in the way of his collapse. And I walked into the life he was so certain I could never build without him. A life that was mine. A life filled with purpose. A life filled with people who loved me without conditions. A life where I could look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back. So, if you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. The night my husband left me stranded in a blizzard was the night I stopped being his victim. He thought he was driving away from a helpless woman. He didn't know he was driving away from the last person who would ever beg him to stay. And 10 days later, when he finally asked, "Where has my wife been?"
Maria gave him the answer he deserved.
"She stopped waiting for you."
And she was right. I had stopped waiting. And that was the moment my real life began.
If this story touched you, subscribe, not for my story, but for the stories of everyone who found the courage to begin again.